Hello everyone, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you to Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary podcast in which I, Toby Haydock, wang on about Doctor Who, but in a very optimistic and cheerful way, trying to guess what my special guest's favourite things about their chosen story might be.
Hello Toby, it's Mark Wright here. I'm a writer. I write lots of things about Doctor Who. For 20 years I've been writing and producing various projects for Big Finish Productions. I write for Doctor Who magazine and the Doctor Who figurine collection, and I was a co-editor on Doctor Who The Complete History across 90 volumes, and with Cavan Scott I co-wrote the official Doctor Who miscellany Whoology to time with the 50th anniversary. The story that I have picked for you to talk about, as you may guess from my background, is The Ambassadors of Death. This is possibly my favourite Jon Pertwee story, more because it's completely unlike Doctor Who. It is this fizzy cocktail of different styles in probably the most season 7 story there is, as Doctor Who tries to recalibrate to what it wants to be. It's experimenting. Ambassadors of Death it's not quite Doctor Who. It's not quite James Bond. It's not quite Quatermass. It's got this strange clash of styles, mostly because of the amount of DNA there is in there, of the different fingerprints that are on that script from David Whittaker onwards. And I just think it's an utterly compelling tale of espionage and a very unique alien invasion that isn't an invasion. Season 7 is categorized by invasions, but I think The Ambassadors of Death is one of the greatest Doctor Who stories of all time. So yes, 7 episodes of The Ambassadors of Death for you to get your teeth into.
Well, welcome everybody. That was the lovely Mark Wright, who I first met at a Doctor Who convention in America, the wonderful Gallifrey convention. Oh, I was young and in love. I'd gone out to Gallifrey with my then wife-to-be, now ex-wife. That proves what a cruel mistress time can be. But I met loads of Doctor Who people out there, and it was because I was touring my one-man show, Moth by Doctor Who Scarf. It was such a heady time. Doctor Who was being successful. I was being quite successful, outside of the environs of the Manchester comedy circuit, where I'd been pottering about perfectly well, and doing okay. But Moth My Doctor Who Scarf was my show, and it opened up a whole new world to me. But also it opened up the world of Doctor Who to me, which had pretty much been a private passion. I'd done the odd bit. I'd written a couple of articles for Doctor Who magazine when I was still at sixth form college, just by sending them in through the post, and they used them, a couple of interviews with people, including with John Abernethy, who we will shortly be seeing in The Ambassadors of Death. But the world, I was not part really of Doctor Who fandom, and suddenly there I was, a guest at an American convention, and there were all sorts of people out there like Paul Cornell and Simon Guerrier and Mark Wright and all these names that I'd read. I'd actually met Paul and Simon when I'd been touring, but suddenly all of these people Rob Shearman were coming into my sort of sphere of reference, and they were fans who were also professionals in their fields. And Mark's name I knew very well, but he and Simon and I, sort of kicked around the bars and did various bits and bobs, and as with lots of other people, I had a great time suddenly socializing with like-minded people and at an event with all the all the heady offshoots of that. And we became friends, and Mark actually ended up coming to our wedding. And then when Mark moved out of London, he moved up north, and then I moved back up north. Mark moved for love. I moved because love had gone in the other direction, and or love wanted to stay where it was and and wanted me to go back whence I came. Anyway, Mark I now very occasionally see, and should see more, because he's actually only across the way from me, but we're both now in the north of England, so we've we've been buffeted about for good reasons and bad. And he's a very talented writer, producer, editor. I had the privilege of working on the Doctor Who Complete History, where everyone had to be rather patient with me as I treated deadlines with a disdain they frankly did not warrant, but we got there in the end. I do leave everything to the last minute. It's how I operate. A friend of mine once said to me, "Oh, you're much better when you just wing it." And it's like, I wish you hadn't said that, because now I will, always and forever. But the nature of this podcast is very much winging it. Say what you see. These commentaries were devised so that I didn't have to, as I do for my other podcasts, where I sit down and write and craft, or at least edit and do retakes and things of Indefinable Magic, and try and at least piece something together that has a kind of form. And with too much information, where just the facts, ma'am, and those facts have to be placed in a sensible, cohesive order and rendered hopefully in a way that is pleasing to the ear. These are spontaneous. I don't even cut out the ers, of which I do plenty. I listen back to many other podcasts, and indeed podcasts I am on, where I don't very much at all. To is human, and to is very much Toby Hadoke. And other people in their podcasts go, well, I'll get rid of those. But no, these are unedited, unexpurgated, unfact-checked. This is just what you get to enable me to release as much as I do. And because my back is up against it at the moment, because I've had various bits and bobs of work on as I record this, I have done in the last week or so contributed to a on-screen feature for a forthcoming Blu-ray release. I've recorded 2 episodes of commentary for a different forthcoming release, and I've also recorded a primetime BBC television programme episode that isn't Doctor Who, and I've also gigged at my day job, and most importantly of all, I've got everything out of the cupboard under the stairs, thrown a lot of it away, and totally I've had the place redecorated. I hope you don't like it. And we've done the front room and a bit of the corner of the living room, and we're currently going through the house. So I've done all of that stuff, but what I need to do is get some Doctor Who happy times and places banked. And where better to go than a story I am hugely familiar with, that I absolutely adore, in the company of a delightful chap. Mark is such a nice man, and he wears his intelligence and his wit very, very lightly. He's really pleasant, easy company, and a nice chap. And seeing him there on the video, he refers to a video which you won't be able to see because these are currently audio only. He was being loomed over by an ambassador with its arms outstretched. You can guess what image he was presenting from, and he's presenting. I don't see him enough. It's a reminder, as I say, that we have lots of people in our lives who we take for granted, especially, I think, considering social media, where we think we've seen somebody, or we think we've consorted with somebody. Not just social media, email and text and everything, and you actually find you haven't seen them in the flesh. I probably haven't seen Mark in the flesh since before the pandemic, but I feel like we were rubbing shoulders very recently. That's also because Time's winged chariot beats its wings. Do chariots have wings? I imagine Time's winged chariot. Oh no, it's because it's Time's winged chariot. That's why it has wings. My God, my brain is atrophying as we speak. I better get on with this before I expire. But look, the reason I have brought, because I choose the order of these, I've got loads of these, ready to go. It's sometimes I choose a story based on a Doctor I haven't done for a while. I'm trying to do more new series Doctor Who because otherwise I'm going to run out of classic Who and still have loads of new series Who to do. But they're harder because I don't know them as well. Whereas this is the Ambassadors of Death. This is a story I know very well. This is a story that I think has a very interesting history in the accounts that have been made of Doctor Who in its relationship with fandom, in its relationship with the production team. For years, this was one of the few Doctor Who stories it was okay to go, yeah, that was probably a bit flawed. Nobody really talked about the Ambassadors of Death as anything other than one where loads of things had gone wrong. It was obviously a very troubled writing process. And in fact, I remember when I first saw this, I was shocked to see that every episode was credited to David Whittaker, because all of the write-ups about it suggested, well, that, you know, General Carrington was a very Malcolm Hulke type of villain, and, you know, we knew that Malcolm Hulke, I'm sure I expected Malcolm Hulke to be at least credited as a co-writer or writer on some of the episodes. Terence Dicks, you know, always said that it was a troubled production and nobody was particularly happy with it. And I remember write-ups of it in the early days saying, and some things that happen in episode 1 are contradicted in episode 7. So I was expecting this completely sort of flawed, total sort of mishmash of loose ends and contradictions that wasn't terribly satisfying to anybody. You know, this slightly weird, slightly flawed, somewhat flawed story that was nothing to write home about. And then I got to know some fans in Wolverhampton, my local city, and there, and I'd been getting bootleg videos for ages, but Ambassadors of Death was nowhere on my list. Partly also because only episode 1 existed in colour and the rest was in black and white, and there was this American version as the home recording from America, but it was really, really dodgy quality. So I was like, well, do I want to watch a bootleg of something that's already of its nature dodgy? So I was in no hurry to watch the Ambassadors of Death, and I must confess it's probably one of the very last stories that I saw collected on video. But when I got to know these fans in Wolverhampton, they said, oh, Ambassadors of Death is great. And I was like, what? Why are they talking about Ambassadors of Death? And I remember where I was. I was in my friend Andy's bedroom where he had his video and his everything set up. And he popped in episode 1 to show the titles, because I knew the titles were done in a slightly different way. But I just thought, it would be the reprise of the cliffhanger, and then, the title would come in. I could imagine how that would happen fairly straightforwardly. I didn't know it would scream at me, and I certainly didn't know there would be an episode 0 cliffhanger, which we were about to see, as it were. So, and I was like, oh, no, wow, that is really good. So then I borrowed his copy and took it home, and then I must have, and I fell in love with the Ambassadors of Death, and I've never quite fallen out of love with it. And I'm aware that part of that is because I had such low expectations, and I know that it is more exciting to me to champion a story that other people are down on, because it makes me feel like special and well-informed and clever. It's like the guy who will always like the Beatles album everybody else doesn't like. I can't name it. I don't know them. There's the White Album, isn't there? But do you know what I mean? The one who wants to show he's the real connoisseur is the prick that will go, yeah, that one everybody likes. Oh, yeah, it's rubbish. But this one that nobody's ever heard of, that you can only get if you actually listen to it upside down in Nepal on the third Thursday of March in a leap year, that's the one I like. I'm aware that I've got that slight element of prickishness about me. I like the idea of liking the ones that, although I really like the traditional story. I like, Caves, yep, Genesis, yep, all the faves, love all of them, always have done as well. And I do slightly also sneer at people who don't like the favourite ones as well, because I think, are you just trying to be special? And people just don't like stuff. That's fine. But I know it's because there might be an element of me that might enjoy being contrary, that I judge people because of that. Anyway, irrespective of that, like what you like. But I do genuinely like the Ambassadors of Death, and I enjoy the process of championing something that is underappreciated. And I was quite pleased that when I did do the commentary for this all those years ago, and in fact there are some episodes on that commentary where I am the only person still alive, which is terrifying, Terence Dicks did sort of acknowledge actually that their feelings about it, that their underselling of it, was perhaps based more on their experience of having had a nightmare producing it than with the end result, as we shall see. I do understand now. I mean, I used to think it was perfect. The past few times I've watched it, I've kind of gone, oh yeah, I can see why people who don't like this story might go, oh, that's going on a bit long here, or that's a bit of an unnecessary thing, or this bit dips here. But I think the contrast between what I was expecting and its reputation, and the fact that it's in season 7, which I love, and I wouldn't love Doctor Who if all of Doctor Who was like season 7, but because season 7 exists as itself within the milieu of Doctor Who, and what I think it's marvellous. Is it marvellous because it's atypical Doctor Who? Maybe, but the beauty of Doctor Who is you can have a season that is atypical, that you wouldn't want all of Doctor Who to be, but because it is that season of Doctor Who and it exists within the whole of Doctor Who, makes it all the more special because it does exist, even though you wouldn't want 3, 5, 10 years of it. You wouldn't want, if somebody came to you and presented this to you as Doctor Who, now you go, oh, I'm not sure that's Doctor Who. But I love season 7. And I remember when I was younger and I found the rest of Pertwee, which I'd expected from the Target novels to be gritty and hard, and that's kind of what I wanted because I was young and stupid and feared charm and whimsy. They didn't seem to me to be what gave you a backbone and made your program be taken seriously. Of course, the beauty of Doctor Who is that it's not serious. That doesn't mean it's stupid. That doesn't mean it needs to put itself down or be self-referential or acknowledge its shortcomings. No. But it should have fun and joy and zest. And I understand when Terence Dicks felt that season 7 didn't have the requisite sort of fantastical streak, and he felt it was a bit too much like Quatermass rather than Doctor Who, although of course I love Quatermass. That's another story, and maybe that's another reason I love season 7. So again, I can understand why it may be a bit too dour for some people, but there is actually, as we'll see, and in fact some of my least favourite bits of Ambassadors of Death that we'll get to are the slightly more whimsical and fantastical bits. But I love season 7. I love what it tries to do. I actually think a lot of the 7-parters sustain their length more than a lot of the later 6-parters. But as I say, when I was younger, this was definitely my favourite slice of Pertwee. I've come to love, partially through doing Happy Times and Places, the Let's Dicks Pertwee that, as I say, was a letdown for me because my imagination thought it would be like an action movie, a Saturday afternoon action movie made by Hollywood, not the, rather colourful and charming and zesty and child-friendly thing that it is. But I've learnt to stop worrying and love the Dicks. Ha ha ha! And let's I do like Derek Sherwin's vision to sort of bring Doctor Who down to earth. The change between episode 10 of the War Games and episode 1 of Spearhead from Space is extraordinary. Of course, that's partially because Spearhead is all on film, but let's not get into that now. But this is a real reinvigoration of the format of Doctor Who. It makes a virtue of the earthbound exile, and I think these stories are really special. And Ambassadors was the poor cousin always in season 7, and I think, again, partially because it's championing the underdog, I think it might be my favourite, but actually I would probably give all of season 7 10 out of 10. So with that in mind, it's going to be a bit of a love-in. I mean, Happy Times and Places is always a bit of a love-in, so apologies. And it's a shame because I listen to some podcasts where people eviscerate Doctor Who stories that annoy them, and they're thoroughly entertaining. This is probably not very entertaining, but it's what I'm doing. And with that in mind, and with my lovely friend Mark Wright as company, we are going to watch The Ambassadors of Death. When I was a Time Top, this was the only episode that existed in its proper full colour. And I always had this episode in colour, and the rest I had in black and white. And then later, it's a story I always lost. Do you know what? I had a bootleg of it, but I loved it so much I lent it to somebody. Never got that back. So then I think I got another copy of that, and I think I lent that to somebody else. In fact, I think I might have lent it to Tylos off of Full Circle, Bernard Padden. So then didn't have it for ages. And then I bought it when it came out on VHS, when it was a mixture of colour and black and white, which seems impossible now that we would have that we would have a story release that was a mixture of formats. And I lent that to somebody because, again, I wanted everyone to know how brilliant Ambassadors was, and it seemed to be the last story everybody got. And I remember not getting that back, and I seemed always cursed to never have the Ambassadors of Death. So I do still have my DVD, I think, but I'm watching it on iPlayer. I'll probably go to the shelf now. Where's my DVD of Ambassadors? So it's always, even though I love it and I'm now very familiar with it, it does always feel slightly removed from me. And it is a slightly removed and odd story. I'm looking at the placeholders on iPlayer now, and one of them is the alien, and I remember the picture of the alien face in the Doctor Who 20th anniversary Radio Time special, and not quite being able to work out if that was a special effect, if that was a person, and you don't see them much in the episode either. So Ambassadors is slightly nebulous to me, if that makes sense. And I quite like that because it adds a bit to the mystique. I always feel like I'm watching it anew, even though I've watched it more than a lot of Doctor Who stories now. But because it was so unfamiliar, and crucially, I hadn't read the Target novelisation. I don't think the Target novelisation was out when I first saw it. So it was a story that unfolded to me without knowing the full story. I knew the cliffhangers because I'd had the Doctor Who magazine issue that had the episode guide. So I knew there was a character called Regan. I knew John Abineri was in it. I knew Ronald Allen was in it. I knew there was a bit by a Weir. And I knew there were these space-suited aliens. And I knew something happened with the titles. And that was kind of what I knew. So I always feel it's slightly unfamiliar to me as it unfolds. And as I say, I was shown the opening couple of minutes of this, and then I think they showed me the bit where the ambassador approaches and does for Max Faulkner in episode 4, is it? And then I, as I say, I took it home and because that's such a great sequence, and watched it and fell in love with it, and it's a love that has never dimmed. And occasionally you'll be with a Doctor Who fan and you'll catch their eye and you'll mention the Ambassadors of Death and they'll give you that look, and you'll know that they too are lovers of the Ambassadors of Death, and it gives you a connection that is unique and special and unassailable. So with that in mind, I hope you glance across the room at me and give me that Ambassadors look as we press play in 3, 2, or 1. So here we go. It's the Ambassadors of Death. I mean, I've just told you everything I think about it, but of course the first thing that is strange to the regular Who viewer is that the titles fade out round about here. And you go, I don't know what it's called. I don't think you register that you haven't had a title yet. That's another beautiful thing about the surprise. Now, I immediately I love this because of the blue tinge on the footage. It makes me feel like they've gone to an extra effort to make this feel like they're transmitting into space. And of course, space was I didn't know this at the time that I first watched it, but this is very much inspired by and exploiting the zeitgeist of televised space events. And of course, the moon landing had not been all that long ago. So all of this stuff was Brave New Worlds, and indeed was watched by people on the telly. Nobody, we saw the moon landings. People then saw the moon landings on the telly. So this is very much of the moment. They took off from Mars manually. They must have been alive then. Something took off from Mars. Best Doctor Who cliffhanger that is not a cliffhanger. That is what my friend Chris Dunford calls the episode 0 cliffhanger. And it's better than some actual Doctor Who cliffhangers. And it's just in the script. It's just a slight sort of tease. Something took off from Mars. But I love the way it's done because I think of the way that Rick Felgate as Van Leyden and Ronald Allen as Ralph Cornish are talking to each other with that very cool formality of professionals doing a very tense job. Ronald Allen has a great quality, which sometimes I remember when he died and there was a suggestion on the news. I remember my mum saying it was on the radio news that he'd he'd been wasted, he'd not been great, or he'd been wasted in Crossroads. There was a slight disparagement to the coverage. Some things never change. And I could see that kind of underplaying doesn't always work and could be seen as being a bit, undersold. Especially maybe in Crossroads, where you're doing it in order to not rise to the kitsch of the occasion. But I think in Doctor Who, I love Ronald Allen because also he sent himself up in the Comic Strip Presents. But in Doctor Who, I think he's perfect in both his parts. He's coldly callous and cruel and cadaver-like as Dominator Rago, and then a year or so later, he's cool, contained, and captivating as Cornish. I hadn't intended that much alliteration. I love Ronald Allen. I think he's dignified, and I think the way that he plays the professional in this really helps to sell these space scenes, there's a lot of them, people in a room talking into microphones. But I think that opening exchange between Rick Felgate, who I also think is excellent, he's a fine naturalistic actor, he's used by Michael Ferguson in The War Machines and in The Seeds of Death because he was his brother-in-law, but I think he's got a naturalistic quality about him, and I think that opening exchange really works because of that. There's real reality to it, as far as you get reality in Doctor Who. I love this scene. It's a bit of silliness. I got to up in the Winefield. You were projected in the future, but I was there because I hadn't arrived yet or whatever. That's a lot of fun. Pertwee deadpans it. Caroline John rises to the occasion. I wasn't there yet. I love that. That's it's completely superfluous, but it's the necessary bit of fun to what could be on occasion quite a dry period in the show, because they've gone for utter realism with the settings. They're not aiming for the sort of colourful characterizations that you will get in other seasons. I'm thinking of the villainy in the War Games, for example, and some of the larger than life characters in season 8, like like Chin and the village in the demons, which are all sort of rather colourful. There's a slight extra dimension to them in order to add the sort of Doctor Who colour, whereas here this is very much going, no, this may be kids' fantasy, but we're playing it for real, guys. And that's an equally legitimate way of doing it. I love the way he goes upside down again. This is totally committed to selling to me that this is real space. This is not fantastical Doctor Who zing-zang space. This is the space of what we've watched on our television screens, the tense history happening in front of our eyes, but it's a job done by professional people. And I think that's what they're really trying to do with Doctor Who here, is to say, that show you watched as kids is growing up. And I think that's a thoughtful and intelligent development. And I think Michael Ferguson is the man to sell this. I mean, I think all the directors in season 7, Derek Martinez, Timothy Coombe, Michael Ferguson, Douglas Camfield, are Doctor Who directors at the top of their game, and they're fine. Look at the close-ups that Ferguson goes for. That very contained professionalism of Ronald Allen, and then you have this beautiful music. I always think it slightly goes down a notch when you see Van Leyden in his space, because this does look a bit more like a man in a set. That blue-tinged picture of him makes me feel like we're communicating with someone in space now, because we know it would look more, I don't know, I think we feel it should look more filmy than that inside the space capsule. I don't know why. Well, with it in its sort of harsh light of videotape day, which is weird because the videotape in the Space Center I think is fine, but this, I think we're a bit close and a bit immediate. It's nobody's fault. But we have to be there with Van Leyden. But I think because of how we've been dealing with him before, it slightly just dilutes the effect we've had up till now. It's not a criticize. I still think it's a brilliant episode, and it just goes to show how fantastic it was before. But I think Rick Felgate, I love the job that we had in the cutback. There's such lovely little touches. The music, I always think reminds me of Procol Harum's Whiter Shade of Pale. I don't know if that's intentional. I'm sure I've read somebody else has felt that as well. I don't know enough about music. Simon Guerrier talks very convincingly about how the music that accompanied the TV coverage of space at that time used, I think, classical music or certain a type of music that is kind of echoed in the Dudley Simpson score, but Simon will talk about that better than I. But he's looked into the genuine TV coverage, and there are echoes of that in what Ferguson does here. The slow motion here you see works, and I think maybe it's because I would like this kind of treatment to when we saw Rick Felgate sitting in his seat before, is that I expect, a bit of slow-mo, a bit of jerkiness, a bit of zero-G when I'm in the spaceship, which we have here, and he's upside down, and he's moving slowly. This is all great. I could have done with some of that, I think, when he was sitting in his chair. I love this vision mixing that Ferguson does. It's a bit like what he does when the Ice Warrior gets zapped by Phipps's solar light in Seeds of Death, but what he does with his moving camera and his cutting and his pacing, Michael Ferguson is a supreme Doctor Who director. What a pleasure it was that I was able to meet him, and because I thought his work on Doctor Who was absolutely fantastic. He only does 4 stories: War Machine, Seeds of Death, Ambassadors of Death, Claws of Axos, but I think he directs them all superbly, and he had an excellent career outside of Doctor Who, and well deserved. He also directs a brilliant episode of Colditz called Tweedledum, which features Michael Bryant and Bernard Kay. This is Cheryl Molyneux, who never tracked down and then read a death notice of. Apparently she was quite a heavy smoker. That's, I think, pretty much all I know about her. But she's Miss Rutherford, and then she disappears after episode 2. That happens quite a bit with this story, and it's almost like you wonder if television was made as it is today, if some of these control room assistant characters, because you do get characters who sort of vanish after the first couple of episodes. It's like, you're just there for that production block, and then we get somebody else. I think that to me shows something of the fractured nature of this production, and yet it's probably more realistic, because you wouldn't have the same control room assistants every day, because people have days off, people get seconded to places, people, as I say, people get breaks. But I think you could probably invest more in proceedings as we do now if you had some of these support characters who had more of a through line. We find this with Regan's henchmen as well, where they're different every week. And I think now, if you were to do this story, those, a lot of these characters would be rolled into one. But actually, it does make it slightly more realistic, even though the sort of television hit person in me sees it, maybe, and because what if I know of the nature of the production, as not deliberate realism, not an attempt at verisimilitude, but actually more to do with the way that it was produced and written. But she gets some nice moments, this character, but we don't see her beyond episode 2. Love Pertwee's entrance. I love the way he comes up and is yelling at somebody that we can't see. Some poor sod who's having just trying to do their job. Doctor Who comes along and yells at them because he doesn't approve of paperwork. He's a bit of a pompous ass, the Doctor, but John Pertwee inhabits it really well. And this is gorgeous because Cornish has got no time for it, and they're not afraid of really pushing it and going, the Doctor's being and actually the single-minded intelligent alien scientist might well have no time for the niceties, but I love the fact that Cornish is equal to it. Get one of your associates out of here. There was a nice high camera as well, but Pertwee makes this work, and I love the fact as well that everybody else is sort of clasping their hands over their ears, but it's getting the Doctor as well, but not to quite the same extent. He's not quite as sensitive to it as everybody else. And I love the laying on of this mystery. I love the setup of this is the mystery. There's a message, and this is paid off later. And I love the fact that the Doctor's... let me explain this to you in very simple terms. He's such a prick. And that the Brigadier has to sort of go, look, this guy's important, and then the Doctor becomes slightly sort of obsequious and creepy, creeps up to him slightly, and they make no attempt to hide this. This is, we're supposed to think the Doctor is flawed in this. It's a deliberate decision that they've made, and it kind of works, even though in lesser hands and with a character we didn't like, and in a less charming show, he'd be awful. And this is a lovely piece of storytelling, because it does sound different, but if you're only sort of half paying attention to that, this next revelation will become news to you. But if you did go, oh, hang on, that's not the same noise as before, this is great, because the Doctor goes, no, that was the reply, and you go, I told you it wasn't the same. So whichever way you digest that second noise, the development of the storytelling helps with your investment, and helps to keep you hooked. It's I think the whole setup of this story is fantastic, with the what's going on. We've got missing astronauts. We've got Michael Wisher here, who, again, Simon sort of pointed out to me, he flickers his eyes slightly like he's reading off an auto cue, even though he probably isn't. But that's, again, because that's what a reporter of his kind would probably be doing. And I always say I don't know anything about Algonquin, but if ever I'm to hear of Algonquin, I will always associate it with episode 1 of The Ambassadors of Death. And also, it's funny because I remember knowing nothing about the character of Taltalion, apart from the fact that he pulls a gun on the Doctor at the end of episode 1, because that had been what I'd read in an archive or an episode guide or something. And I didn't know who the actor was, and that hadn't registered either when I'd read. In fact, I think I only knew John Abernethy and I think I knew Dallas Cavell was in it, and Ronald Allen. Lots of lovely stock footage. We've seen these radars before, a lot of them in black and white. Oh, she speaks French, doesn't she? Non, c'est oui. I always think that was quite impressive. But Taltalion, I never really quite liked as a character, because I don't know, because I think I kind of knew he was a baddie from straight away. It turns out to be a little bit more complicated than that. But I think I was also quite surprised that he had a French accent. I love... and he was born in France, Robert Corddry, but he's Scottish. He's a Scottish actor. It is a put-on French accent. And he's also got a false beard. And I love Gary Gillett's description in... I love this bit as well, where the Doctor's saying, I'm trying to get a map of London, and Ralph Cornish goes, you can get a map of everything in the known universe, but London, no. And I love the sort of dry... way that he gives him that, and the Doctor's just all these little touches that just make me think that these are people talking to each other. But Taltalion is slightly less successful, but I love Gary Gillett's description, saying every time he takes his glasses off, you think his nose and his beard are going to come with it. It's such a sort of unconvincing physiognomy, which I think is rather fun. Here is the mighty John Abernethy and Ray Armstrong, who again is one of those characters that disappears after the first 2 episodes. There's a few of them. Robert Robinson coming later. They all vanish after episode 2. But Ray Armstrong is the only surviving actor from this episode, and indeed from episodes 1 and 2. I've never interviewed him, but I did trace him to some sort of community somewhere miles away. But I think a friend wrote to him and got a bit of a reply back. He's on my list of things to do, but I think it was recently, but it was probably 7 or 8 years ago. But the last I heard, Ray Armstrong was still with us, and as I say, the last credited actor. This is a fantastic sequence. This is Michael Ferguson all over. I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to talk about John Abernethy and his very high forehead. And I'm not sure that that's his actual hair. I think I know a couple of floor managers who've suggested to me that he would have a private moment where he would have a sort of a bit of an addition, because in those days, actually, being bald was something that people were, or balding was something that people were very self-conscious about. I'm definitely glad we've overcome that now, speaking from personal experience. But also, isn't it strange that the comb over was a weird thing. Nobody has a comb over anymore. You just own your baldness. Anyway, let's not talk about baldness. But I think that's a toop. My mum worked with a guy called Tone the Toop. That's because he had a toupee. And because it wasn't your wig, you'd have a hairpiece. And Tone the Toop, because he was called Tony, and he had a toupee. Oh, isn't that weird? I like the way that these guys are really, really calm. There's something about the fact that they behave with that sort of reserve that suggests, they're not your common or garden criminal. These have an officialness about them, which suggests that maybe they're establishment figures, and Carrington's got a buttonhole as well. It's all very, very slightly done. And of course, this is one of the first flowerings of the Havoc team. And there's Terry Walsh. This is Robert Robertson, who later was a regular in Taggart. And in fact, there's Derek Ware. Now, this is where, actually, interestingly, the director deviates slightly from the book, from the script, because I'm sure in the script it is explicit, and Carrington says don't kill anyone unless absolutely necessary, that everybody's guns fly from their hands. Nobody actually, none of the soldiers have that happen to them, get shot and killed. And we do have it a bit later where we see guns, or I've missed it, where guns fly out of people's hands and there's shots that happen around people rather than hitting them. But also Ferguson has occasionally gone, you fall off there, you die there. The script is very definitely, none of the unit soldiers are killed because these henchmen have been told not to kill anyone, which makes sense of why Collinson drops the gun later when he's pointing it at the Brigadier. These fights are all fantastic. I love this bit where Nicholas Courtney's bang, bang, bang. That's Derek Ware again getting punched by Billy Horrigan, and the way that they put the punch noises on that as well. It looks like Derek Ware's been hit on the nose. It's very, very cleverly done. Terry Walsh there fighting Alan Chuntz, but it's a really well orchestrated sequence, even though I think Ferguson deviates slightly from what he's supposed to, in that the unit soldiers aren't supposed to be no unit soldier is supposed to be killed. Is it? I mean, it's not it's not explicit that they are, so you could kind of but in terms of communicating the desires of the script, I think he takes a couple of liberties, which is and it's fine. I think it's worth it. I think it's a fantastic sequence, and this is a great tense moment, especially as Robert Robinson is and Nicholas Courtney are both sort of very sweated up. Robertson was a Scottish actor who, not long before we'd done the commentary, and he was on the opening titles of Taggart. He was by the end of his career, he was actually a sort of well-known television face, having been a sort of doughty man of the screen. But he also, I think. Did spoken word? Did he do Robbie Burns night, stuff like that? Anyway, and I think he was doing a spoken word thing when he became one of those rare actors to. I think he died on stage, Robert Robertson, which doesn't happen to many actors. Leonard Rossiter he died in his dressing room, didn't he? Gordon Reed, who's in Invasion of the Dinosaurs 1, he died on stage. But Tommy Cooper, not many do. I'm not sure. You sort of romantics go, it's the way I'd want to go. No, because it'd be really awkward because people wouldn't know what to do, and it's probably not very dignified to be dead in public. Do you know what I mean? But also the romantic in me goes, yes, but yeah, we'd like to dance there. And that's actually good, because I've just realised we're about to reach the end of the episode. That explosion, we don't know what's happened to the Brigadier there. I love the way that Abernethy fires as he's going out the window as well. It's just, again, a nice little touch that makes you think you're in a programme that's slightly different to the fantastical Doctor Who. But the way this screen goes down, you desperately want the picture to go down with it, because his head should go down as well, whereas the screen was going down and his head stayed where it was. But then again, it's quite a funky look, quite a funky effect. Now, I think these solar flares, do they ever happen? Are they the things that, fan lore, when we're saying some things that happened in episode 1 were contradicted in episode 7? I don't think it has any more of those than any other Doctor Who story. But the way that we were sold this was that, this was a real mess. But I think maybe one time when I was watching this, I thought, oh, did the solar flares ever happen? But actually, it doesn't matter, because they get the ship back next week anyway. So no, I think that's a whole load of baloney. And I think this is really good, because Ronald Allen's selling the drama of that in a very understated way. We have the empty spaceship, which is mysterious. We've got 3 missing astronauts now. The astronaut that's gone to get them has gone missing. Something took off from Mars. It's a beautiful mystery. We've got something going on in this warehouse with these villains that don't behave like villains, that they're a bit more civilized. The reprise, this bit's at a different angle. And then we've got this cliffhanger that comes out of nowhere, and look, straight up the barrel of a gun. And I've got a feeling you wouldn't be allowed to do straight up the barrel of a gun. I've got a feeling that was stopped, or maybe it just became not fashionable to do it. But it's quite a daring move. And I remember being very annoyed that Robert Corddry was credited before John Abernethy. I beg your pardon, but it's because the closing credits of Ambassadors of Death are uniquely done, in that I've done a whole podcast about that, is that the main guest cast actors, because Doctor Who has gone from crediting, as it does for much of the 60s after Verity Lambert leaves, really, but on and off, listen to the podcast, where it's the Doctor and then the cast, including the companions, in order of appearance. Doctor always top billing, everyone else in order of appearance. There are exceptions to this rule. The Space Pirates is one of them. However, when we come to the Pertwee era and colour television, that way of doing things has gone slightly out of fashion, and instead you get the Doctor and the regulars in order of importance, in contractual order, Doctor, Liz Shaw, Brigadier. And then you get the guest cast in order of importance, except in the Ambassadors of Death, where you have the main guest characters who fluctuate, but generally Ralph Cornish, Totalion, Regan, General Carrington. Quinlan and Lennox, the rules slightly change for. But anyway, you get them in order of appearance, which is why Carrington is third billed this week, but he gets first billed in episode 7. And Totalion will get first billing next week, because he's the first to appear. I remember that's when I realised something was up, when the billing changed on episode 2. And then all the other guest cast after those sort of single slide credits for the main guest actors, then everybody else comes after that, sharing a slide or whatever, not in order of appearance necessarily. No, not in order of... Well, no, maybe they are. Yeah, maybe they are. I think... No, I don't think that. I think you could apply that to episode 1, but I don't think it does for the rest of it. But anyway, yeah. So the main guest cast are credited in order of appearance, whereas then next time on Inferno we go back to its standard, Stallman, Sir Keith, Greg Sutton, Petra Williams, except of course when they're the alternative Earth versions and their real versions don't appear, and then they get Director Stallman, section leader Elizabeth Shaw, whatever. It's beautiful. I mean, I could just revel in the credits. I think that's... I don't like to be, Doctor Who fans, we're wacky, but I do think my obsession with the way that credits are done is truly pointless. And I mean, it's not artistic, is it? I understand people who could be obsessed with music or even with actors and acting and with locations even. That has a kind of practical thing to it, because you can visit a location or you can work out where the geography is, and that brings into it aspects of budget and vision and travel and practicality and all of that. But the way the credits are done, it may be that all of what I've just said is only of interest to me, but part of me is quite proud that it's something I can claim as a sort of specialism, is that I can tell you how the credits work in pretty much all Doctor Who stories. And the only other one that does it really like this in the colour era is Invasion of Time, where you've got another 60s director, Gerald Blake, who again credits his guest cast generally in order of appearance, so the credits fluctuate, although different people get a single slide as well, rather than in order of importance. And there are other, as I say, anomalous ones. Mask and Mandragora, they mix the order about because it's more, I think they see it as more of an ensemble, but Norman Jones as Hieronymus gets a single slide always. Anyway, I'm sure you don't care, but it's just one of the many joys to me of The Ambassadors of Death, which is a story I will be celebrating with great enthusiasm because I absolutely adore it. And I love that first instalment. I think it's action-packed. I think it's tense. I think it's really well acted. I think it lays the mystery on thick. I think it's got a great fun TARDIS scene with the Doctor and Liz. I think John Pertwee was on great, albeit appalling form. It's an excellent production. The design is really good. There's something slightly weird and different about it. As I say, you're at slightly arm's length from it. It's familiar and yet slightly different, and it's like Doctor Who and yet it's slightly not like Doctor Who. It's like season 7 and yet it's slightly not like season 7 quite. It's certain season 7's not like other Doctor Who. I mean, yeah, but the thing I'm going to choose as my favourite thing from episode 1, I could choose the episode 0 cliffhanger. I love that moment. They took off from Mars 7 months ago. They must have been alive then. And it's the beep as well. It's the beep that gives it that verisimilitude of, we're communicating. It sounds plausible to me. I don't know if that would happen with space communication. It seems real to me. And the fact that it's sometimes slightly off because there's a delay or whatever. The way that those beeps are placed in the communication between the two smacks of realism, smacks of being slightly different from how we do. If you think about the way they communicate in The Seeds of Death, where it's people on a screen and Locke can talk from Moonbase to Professor Eldred's laboratory, and it's a close-up of him on a screen, and it's just very, very straightforward. The fact that this has got the colour treatment that gives it's not black and white, it's sort of slightly blue-hued. The fact that you feel like there's a slight time delay, the fact that he goes upside down, the fact that it's slightly muffled, the fact that it's got that beep, it's all adds to all of that, which builds the tension, which suggests the situation that's going on. Which just makes the production, I think, come alive. And then that line, something took off from Mars, brilliantly delivered, very deliberately undramatically by Rick Felgate. He's not aware that it's the cliffhanger, as it were, that leads us in to that unique way of doing the titles. I love that episode 0 cliffhanger. I love the fight with Unit and the Havoc team. It's a great announcement for the Havoc stunt team, who are going to be such an important part for a very short-lived period. And I have a personal attachment to that because I knew Derek Ware a bit. He was one of the first Doctor Who people I met properly. First Doctor Who person to come to my house. First one of the early Doctor Who people that I interviewed. I mean, interviewed by leaving a questionnaire for him, and he answered in great detail with typed pages that I still have somewhere. but my brother had met him prior to that. So Derek Ware was a Doctor Who person that we kind of knew and had an association with, and then I realised later what a lengthy association we had with Doctor Who, and I of course subsequently made a documentary with Derek and the Havoc team. So I've always felt a bit of a connection with Derek Ware, but Havoc. But aside from my own personal connection, Havoc are really important, and Michael Ferguson, the director, uses Havoc so well, and that is a brilliant scene. That scene in the warehouse, it's well orchestrated, it's well shot, it looks real, it looks like Derek Ware's getting punched, glass gets broken, bullets smack holes in the walls. It's also got that quite funny bit of the Brigadier going bang, 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 Billy Horrigan jumping off the gantry. But everyone there in their donkey jackets, looking sort of tough, and Alan Chun's with his hair really short, looking. They look tough, they look real, they look like proper gangsters. It's really well orchestrated. I love the way that, and then the calm sort of patient professionalism of John Abernethy and Ray Armstrong as they're there waiting for their signal, and they make their escape in a dignified way. It's just more interesting way of playing and presenting some things we might think that we're familiar with, that gives this story its own special kind of feel. The fact that Carrington's got a buttonhole as well, but I love the whole sort of detached, professional, dignified way that they conduct themselves, in contrast to what's going on downstairs that is buying them the time, but they still don't leave their dignity. They don't chuck that out the window as they exit through it. As I say, the firing of the gun and everything is brilliant. Love that. Love the mystery. Love the whole bit with the message. And the mystery of that. Love the way that John Pertwee enters space control, and you have that wonderful sort of testy banter, and the fact that Ralph Cornish is equal to it. Love Ronald Allen. I think that's a great performance. I think he really levels the thing and gives it a plausibility. And he's he's the cool mission controller, cool in a crisis, and it's as I say, that sort of acting can get labelled as a bit kind of lazy or underpowered, but I think it's actually got a lot of presence to it, and is really helpful to the pacing and to the import of those scenes and the drama that is going on within them, and that they're being dealt with by professional people, and the fact that they're in control in an out of control situation somehow makes it a bit more dramatic. It would be less dramatic if everyone was fretting and shouting at each other. I think that really helps it, actually. So many things that I love about that episode. The music is beautiful as well. The fact that it's being broadcast on the television, that you have Michael Wisher there, as the television presenter. And, nice to see Michael Wisher. Great servant. Another great servant to the show. So many great servants to Doctor Who doing work here. David Myerscough-Jones is the designer. He's the guy who did the Web of Fear. This is, these are all major players doing beautiful work. But the thing, I'd love to leave this to the end and have it as my bonus thing overall. But I think if I don't claim it now, it's going to be too late. Because if I claim it first, I get the point. You know what I mean? If Mark claims something now, I can't then choose it in a later episode. It's gone. It's off the table. It's a no-brainer. It's not the Ambassadors of Death, is it? It's the Ambassadors of Death. That is my choice for episode 1. That is one of my favourite things of Doctor Who ever. And I remember the first time I saw it, I knew that the title came after the cliffhanger reprise. I didn't know it was going to come after an introductory scene of episode 1, which is why I love it so much here, much as I love it later on as well. But because I thought it was you were just going to get, I don't know what I thought the music was going to do, but I assumed you were going to get, a bit of the title sequence and the title. But I didn't expect it would scream at you and it would have this special sort of consolidated bit like a mini version of the theme tune that just went kapow, kapow, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. And the first time I saw that, I went, wow, that is the best thing ever. Why didn't they always do this? I mean, you wouldn't be able to do it with every story, would you? You know, it wouldn't quite work. You know, the power of Kroll, you know, Legopol is, you know, it wouldn't quite work. I mean, it would make Christopher Bidmead be a bit more imaginative with his story titles, maybe. But I know there are a lot of people that love those enigmatic, you know, planet name titles too. There's a beauty in everything, but I do like my dramatic titles, and especially if they're to be rendered like the ambassadors of death. I love that. I love that it exists. It probably is better because it only exists as part of the ambassadors of death. But I think it's a thing of absolute beauty. I think it's inspired. I love that it's part of a small 7-occasion part of Doctor Who's rich pantheon. A little bit of needlework in its massive tapestry, but oh my God, it pricks. I just love it. I love it so much, and I'm sure Mark will either choose it now, or he'll want to choose it later on. Now, if he chooses it later on, of course, that's trouble for me, because it means he won't have chosen the thing I've chosen when he chooses it. So he might choose it as his bonus thing, in which case I've screwed up, because... but I couldn't wait. I absolutely couldn't wait. I had to get in there first, because there's no way I wouldn't want to celebrate the ambassadors of death. And I've got a feeling he might come in with this as his first choice, because it is such a calling card for the story, which is, and it's the story in a nutshell. It's dramatic, it's unusual, it's familiar and yet slightly different. It's exciting yet slightly dissonant, slightly odd. It's Doctor Who yet not quite as we know it. It's season 7, yeah, and you know, season 7 does all of its titles slightly differently. Spearhead from Space, you know, the wording just comes forward a bit. Doctor and the Silurians done in the traditional way, but it's got the words Doctor and Who in the title. The Ambassadors Kapow of Death does that, and then Inferno on the stock footage of the volcano. So every title, which means that it does feel not uniform, and I can understand from producer's point of view going, no, this has to be recognisably the same product every week. And I think that's probably the more sensible way about it. But I love the fact that we can go back and find there were times when they didn't do that, when they experimented, when they saw. Now I see that probably as a sign of going, oh, you saw. Well, no, because they'd probably do it every now and again, and it would be an absolutely deliberate choice. Whereas here, I think, I mean, it was a deliberate choice, but production was a bit more fractured and week by week. And you couldn't sort of uniform in the way now. You know, you'd have your season overview. You could change if they wanted to go. You know, if they were doing it now and somebody came up with this way of doing the titles, they could go back to the equivalents of Spearhead from Space and Doctor and the Silurians and insert those in if they wanted to, and do it a little bit of a pickup or a reshoot or a re-edit to uniformalize things. Is that a word? Whereas those days, no, it was a week by week, you know, fortnight by fortnight production where you would try things, and so you know it is slightly fractured, but from an historical point of view, from a fan going back in history, it means that the show is full of surprises as you go back over its history, and you think you've got a period of it, you know, you think you've got your angle on it, and then you go, oh no, they've decided to do that this week. That's brilliant. And I love all of that. So let's see what Mark Wright has decided for episode 1 of The Ambassadors of Death. And I hope it's that he chooses The Ambassadors Kapow of Death.
So, episode 1. My favourite thing about episode 1 of The Ambassadors of Death is that wonderful sequence of Unit arriving at the warehouse. It's shot in the most brilliant, urgent documentary style by Michael Ferguson. Again, adding to that unusualness of the Ambassadors of Death. He really goes for a different style, but it also combines with Dudley Simpson's wonderful flute music, which again very unusual for the time of an era that was going for more towards the electronic style. And I think the directing, along with that theme, which I kind of count as the unit theme, and it does reappear again in this story. And I really wish Dudley Simpson would have used it again. But I think that whole sequence of the storming of the warehouse, the music, it's so unusual and brilliant and compelling that I rewatch that scene over and over again. And then, of course, we notice Nick Courtney, dear old Nick Courtney, firing the Brigadier's gun, and you can just tell that he's completely not into it. But that sequence, the directing, that sequence, and Dudley's wonderful unit theme too.
Well, that's it. I mean, he does use that score again. And I remember it was a great. It was one of those eureka moments for me when watching The Mind of Evil. He does use that unit theme again, but it's an electronic rendering of it. And I always think of Mind of Evil as a sort of companion piece with season 7, and I love the fact that we get that theme again, but a different realization of it. But yes, it's a shame. It's a shame we don't get, because it's a great tune. I love that piece of music, and in a lesser episode, that piece of music alone would vie for top spot. But yeah, that sequence is fantastic. And you're right about Nicholas Courtney firing the gun. He's not comfortable with action at all. He's not very good at fighting. He doesn't. We'll see in episode 7. I'm sure I'll talk about it. He doesn't really bend his fist when he punches, which is odd because he's so convincing and so good as the Brigadier. But and I do love the way he shoots the 3 guys. I just think because it's slightly comical. But yeah, he's not hugely confident with that. Doesn't matter. He's unflappable and brilliant, and I love him. Yeah, good choice. I mean, it is great, that warehouse fight. It's a highlight, and it's a brilliant sequence. But I had to choose the Ambassador's Kapow of Death, and now I'm convinced that Mark is going to choose it as his bonus thing when we do episode 7, and he has to choose an overall thing, which means I won't get the point for it. Damn! But I was trying to be clever. Never try and be clever, Toby. Okay. Well, that wasn't a very promising start, was it? And I was so enthused about the Ambassador's stuff. I'm now thinking, why? Of course he's going to choose that as his overall thing. Of course he is, because it's an overall thing. But I had to get in there first, didn't I? Well, that's because I was trying to play the game. Never try and play the game, Toby. Don't do... And if Ambassadors of Death teaches us anything, it's that don't do it the usual way. Because it's the fact that the Ambassadors of Death does things in an unusual manner that makes it the Ambassadors of Death. Or should that be the Ambassadors Kapow of Death? So until next time, thanks for listening, and I'll speak to you on the next episode of Happy Times and Places, or as it shall be known for the next 7 installments, Happy Times, Kapow, and Places. Oh, well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Thanks so much for listening to it. Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Haydock, and my special guest, Mark Wright, who can be found on Twitter. Some people call it X, but I'm still an Opal Fruits kind of guy, so Twitter it is to me. He is at MWrightWriter, Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T, MWrightWriter. That's Mark Wright, open brackets, no, not that one. I think there's a footballer. That this one isn't. So find him there at MWrightWriter. I'm grateful to Mark and to the patrons who make these podcasts possible. And they include Simon Farker, Roger 1966, Simon Liss, Philip Fitchett, Stephen Waters, Peter Kelly, Peter Burns, James Curray-Smith, Peter Harness, Ronald Hayden, Rob Leonard, Christopher Meredith, Gavin McLean, Richard Straw, Neil Tate, Nick Tedston, and Ruben Herfindahl. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. If you would like your name read out on the credits, that is one of the perks of being a patron, which you can become at patreon.com/Toby Haydock, where for as little as £3 a month you get advanced releases, you get bonus material. There's been a lot more of that lately, behind the scenes, some of the DVD and Blu-ray features that I've done, photographs, footage, also exclusive interviews that I've done. Any interviews I do now, I sort of put out there as well. You also get advanced releases. This will be hopefully about 6 months ahead, and the Too Much Informations are currently 2 releases ahead, and the Indefinable Magics are about a release or so ahead as well, but I'm planning to get further ahead as well, so that it's really worth your while paying £3 a month or more. You can go right up to £1 billion if you like. Nobody has yet, which is a huge surprise, but it's a pay what you can and what you like, because everything is available in terms of release and content at the lowest tier, and you also get a 10% discount if you sign up for a year in one go. So hopefully it's worth it. There's usually about 3 releases a week, some bigger than others, and that doesn't include the pictures of my dog on a Tuesday, which I don't count, but are there every Tuesday, regular as clockwork. But not everybody likes my dog. Well, I mean, not everybody likes dogs, and if you don't like dogs, you won't like my dog. But if you do like dogs, I hope you like my dog. He's called Bernard. But anyway, he's not, not as advertised. That's a bonus. There's 3 releases a week, bonus material, lots of other things. Patreon.com/Toby Haydock. If you don't want to do that, you can go to Ko-fi.com/Toby Haydock and throw a few silvers into my coffers as and when the inclination takes you. It's like you're buying me a coffee. And unfortunately, it's the way that we freelance creatives, if that's what we are, have to solicit for a living these days. I feel dirty doing it. Not so dirty as somebody actually specifically wrote it and said, well, if you don't want to do it, just do advertising. I'd rather do it this way because it's a choice. But it does mean I have to point it out to you, and I want you to know that it doesn't come naturally to me, but I'm still prepared to do it, which is why I'm doing it right now. I just want you to know it makes me feel a bit dirty. You might like it. You might like that I feel a bit. I think this is becoming a different thing. I think this is becoming something else right now. You like me dirty, don't you? Well, if you do, give me some money, and then we can all be dirty together. Patreon.com/Toby Haydock. Ko-fi.com/Toby Haydock. But look, money does not have to change hands for me to be ever so grateful. All you have to do is to give these 5-star reviews wherever you get your podcasts. Really helps if you're an Apple person and you go onto Apple Podcasts. If you haven't rated and reviewed these, please do. Stalled a little bit. 5 stars really helps to get the algorithm shining and to get these out there to people who may not know that they exist. And also a few lines of review helps people to know what it is that's good about these, if there's anything that you think is good. But if you're still listening, if you don't think it's good, you're a masochist and you're mad. So if you're still listening, well, if you've got time to do this, you've got time to write a nice couple of lines. And as I record this, all of Toby Haydock's Time Travels will also be appearing on YouTube in their podcast section on my YouTube channel, which is at Toby. It's not at, is it? It's just Toby Haydock. Toby Haydock's YouTube channel, so that people can have them on their YouTube, which apparently people like to have. With just I've done video releases because I used to record myself visually doing these, but that took a lot of editing. But what we will have is I will probably eventually put all the introductions like Mark's. He recorded his on video with him, loomed over by an ambassador of death. And I don't want the videoing labours to go to waste, but I'm not going to be editing visual videos of me just talking into a microphone, because YouTube now very helpfully just presents audio material with placeholders, which is very useful for a technical incompetent like me. So these will also all be on YouTube as well, and you can subscribe to my channel there and help me get that algorithm shine as well. I want all my algorithms to be sexy and a little bit dirty by the end of the year, so do all of that. aside from Doctor Who, I am a working stand-up comedian, and I have a regular comedy night in Manchester every Tuesday called Excess Malarkey. It's excellent value. We get some fantastic comedians. It's not a boorish stag do, hen do, office party, shout fest. It's eclectic. It's slightly strange, slightly off the beaten track occasionally, but also we have, proper headliners from Friday to Saturday night comedy clubs as well, but in an environment where it's about the comedy, and it's just a nice Tuesday night out. And I keep the prices as low as possible because, frankly, I don't spend that much on my wardrobe, and I find eating every day is an indulgence. But it's a great club. It's won loads of awards, and it's I'm really proud of it. So if you can ever come to Manchester on a Tuesday night, Excess Malarkey, it's at Excess Malarkey on Twitter, and it's also got presence on Instagram and on Facebook, as have I. I'm on Instagram, toby.haydoke. I'm experimenting with videos and content and all of that there. And I'm on Twitter at Toby Haydoke, and these podcasts have their own feed at Haydoke Podcasts. So follow, click, subscribe, like, do all those things that help me to shine like a beacon in the murky vista of cyberspace. Wow, what we currently at? Hour and 15 minutes nearly. I think it's fair to say I do go on a bit. Is there a slight buzz to this recording? I've tried a slightly different setup, but I think the projector's making a noise. My computer's fan is like a whirling dervish, and as I've done a little bit of playback, I can hear the sound sort of slightly cut out. So I'm not over the moon about that, so I'm sorry if there was some interference. I think it's a massive solar flare build-up. That actually won't end up being that dramatic, but might be a great cause of concern in episode 1. Feedback always welcome, although if you're a non-patron, by the time you're feeding back, I could have gone to Mars. But I say that largely because I couldn't think of anything else to say for the post-credits bit. I'm hoping that this will all be news to everybody, because I sometimes worry that the piano being played next door gets picked up and people go, no, can't pick up the thing. But I think I heard this coming out just out of the MacBook. So but I want these to be as professional as possible, as professional as they can be, with one man and a microphone set up at his house, and also, to let you little peek behind the curtain, I have had the sort of microphone permanently sort of set up by the sofa, so it's ready to go, and I can just do a podcast whenever. And it's been deemed somewhat in the way, so I now have to wheel it back into the corner and wheel it back out again. So it's not as permanent a setup as it was. So maybe I'm mindful of the fact that might have knocked something out of sync, or maybe I'm just resentful. But it does mean that the living space is slightly less invaded. I should really do these in my proper sound booth that's over there in the corner, but then I'd probably have to watch the episodes on a tiny monitor and not on a sofa. And I quite like watching on a sofa, and I loved having those big ambassadors of death sexy close-ups projected onto a much bigger screen than I'd be able to have if I was recording these under proper circumstances. So you might have to do with a bit of ambient noise, just to have that feeling about it, that it's not in a sort of the cold vacuum of a sound recording. My own little enclosed Mars probe capsule that I would be in, cut off from everybody and prone to disappearing. No, you get me in the bustle of space control, of Haydoke mission control. But if it is distracting, or you've got any suggestions, do let me know. As I say, particularly if you're a patron, because if you're a non-patron, several of us will probably be dead by now. I really wish I hadn't said that. It's not very comforting, is it? The podcast of death.